Kiernan, the director of One Family, and Maura, one of the founders, asked me to read a message from her, so I'm literally going to read it directly as she wrote it. I am sad not to be with you in person tonight, but glad that Karen has agreed to read for me. I've always been very proud to be one of the infamous small group of women who gathered in the Kiernan Road in 1972. My image of that small group is always of us huddling together as if for warmth. If we did huddle, I'm not sure it was for too long, but the coming together was for all of us grabbing at lifelines. I had spent my pregnancy hiding, going to work in the most ridiculous outfits in an effort to hide my condition, which I in fact did very successfully, and I worried to such a degree that about 6 weeks before my child was born, I got shingles, and so my doctor had good reason at last to sign me off work. What was I worried about? Them out there, the people who somehow could take my baby away from me. After all, the fact that I was determined to keep my child meant that I was inadequate. At least that was what I was told on my first foray into looking for help. Shame was the other big thing. Where did all of this come from? It's fascinating about what is not said in families. Ever since I could remember, there was a knowing that something could happen to girls. It was never specified, but totally tangible, and whatever it was that could happen would undoubtedly be their fault. This, together with my mother's eternal sigh that I would come to a bad end, crystallized when I found myself pregnant with no husband and not even a man who was prepared to hang around. Oh, the shame, but of course I had fulfilled the prophecy. As it happened when I got pregnant, both my parents were dead, but there was a big extended family who were more than supportive when they were told. But that was after the event. Before my daughter's birth, I struggled with all kinds of conflicting emotions, and my thinking was all over the place. Even though a reality check might have assured me that I was doing pretty well, I'd bought a mobile home, thanks to a prolonged bank strike. I had a pretty good job, my own car. The struggle really was ongoing about the best thing to do for my child. All of my instinct and observation of the world around me told me my child needed to be with me. But the weight and pressure of the perceived wisdom was so great that there was no way I could make the decision unequivocally. But make the decision I did, and it was probably 8 months after Carol was born that I met my first real-life other unmarried mother. Nothing ever happens in a vacuum, and neither did the emergence of Cherish. Katrina would have set the scene on how things were for the 20 years or so before the organisation emerged, and she may have talked about Irene Proctor and the widows, about AIM and the deserted wives, about women's liberation, who, by the way, around that time produced a newsletter in which they talked about a central organisation which will help and rehabilitate the unmarried mother. We didn't want rehabilitation. We wanted acceptance for ourselves and for our children. Nevertheless, the shadow women were stirring in Ireland, and it was only a matter of time until us lot did the same. All of the above is well documented in Single Issue, the book which I wrote about the setup of Cherish, which I had to read again to remind myself about how things were way back then. Quite frankly, even I find it hard to believe. By the time I got to the point where I knew at least 3 other unmarried women who were keeping their children, I had bought a little house on the Kiernan Road, and it was there that the embryonic organisation began to take form. At first in 1972, we just met to give each other support, to hear each other's stories, and probably most importantly to know we weren't alone. We decided to put a small ad in the Irish press with a phone number saying unmarried mothers were meeting, and the floodgates opened. Unmarried women with children started to emerge from the shadows where lots of them had lurked for years, rearing their children as best they could, some with family support and some totally alone. And we might have continued in this way for a long time, except that in February 1973, Jack Lynch dissolved the Dáil and called an election. It was like a call to arms, and we were galvanised into action. There were discussions, of course, should we go public? Should we not remain just a support group? I guess it became inevitable that we had to emerge, because what we wanted above all was acceptance, and that could only happen by bringing about huge change in Ireland at every level. An agenda for a meeting on the 14th of March 1973 makes my head spin. On the care side, there were lists of girls, note not women, in need of everything from a cot to a flat to clothes for the baby. new members to be contacted. Then there was the campaigning side, reports from ministers, publicity contact from RTE 7 Days, interviews with Women's Way and Women's Choice, and embassies, Swedish Embassy, Colette and Neil, Danish Embassy Annette, a report on AIM, Margaret Murphy. So by the end of 1973, we got our first allowance, become incorporated, we had Mary Robinson for president, we had a group of directors and patrons, several of whom were bishops. We had produced our first newsletter, and we had a first grade Santa party for the children organised by BSI. All kinds of other aspirations were in the famous minutes, most importantly, very simply stated, buy a house. That Cherish, now one family, continued for 40 years is thanks totally to the incredibly, mostly women, who've kept it going, none more so than the present board of directors and staff. In a way, it was easy for us. We were forging ahead for our children, and once we had emerged from the shadows, we got an awful lot of support from every direction. Another thing which I believe has helped one family to survive is having a house. Like a family, an organisation needs a safe base from which to operate, and I think 2 Lower Pembroke Street has provided that. In single issue, I tried to thank and acknowledge everyone who created and enabled this organisation to flourish, and of course, inevitably, people will have been left out. But there's one person whose input to Cherish has not, I think, ever really been properly acknowledged. She is, of course, Nuala Ferrick, and really only knows how she survived. Thanks, Nuala, and I apologise for all the times I made your life more difficult. But we had great times, didn't we? I'm hoping it doesn't take another 40 years of struggle in Ireland to eliminate the kinds of difficulties which single parents still experience. I hope the Constitution will be changed to reflect the diverse makeup of the modern family, and I hope that as long as the need is there, that one family will be there to help meet that need. Slán agus Banach, Maura Richards, Minch View, the 17th of October 2012.
Now, One Family is an organisation that I've always admired. I've always been a little bit in awe of it. And I think that's going back several decades. And I think the reason I was in awe of it was because of the bravery of the individual women who really did strike out against social attitudes. I think there was a huge bravery in it, and a huge innovation, and a real willingness to take on very deep-seated attitudes. And it wasn't easy to do it at all. It was very difficult. I'm glad to hear as well there was so much fun and camaraderie, because I know that was part of it as well. But I do think that doesn't take away at all from the kind of energy that was needed, the bravery, the commitment to do what those women who founded Cherish did at the time when they did it. And I'm really here tonight, obviously, as somebody who watched that, who supported it, and who was involved at a slightly later stage in many of the issues that Cherish had started and worked on. I'm here to acknowledge that and to say so very well done to those women, some of whom join us here tonight, and to thank them for that pioneering spirit, because it laid the foundation for the changes in social attitude which we have seen, and it laid the foundation for the kind of supports that families needed, and individuals needed, and children needed. And I really want to pay a very special tribute to the founders of Cherish back in 1972, and to thank them on behalf of all of us, and to thank them for those very strong foundations that were laid then. And a very special thank you to the women who join us here tonight, who laid those foundations. Thank you very much indeed.